What we wear tells a story. It is a language we all speak, every single day, without saying a word. In England, this story is especially rich and colourful. The history of English fashion is more than just a tale of changing clothes. It's, a journey through time, reflecting the very soul of the nation. From the simple wool garments of ancient tribes to the diverse styles seen on London's streets today, clothing has always been a mirror. It shows us who people were, what they believed, and how their world was changing around them. Fashion is a powerful part of English identity and culture. Looking back, we can see how every stitch and every seam holds a piece of history. The clothes people wore were shaped by their daily lives, their work, and their place in society. A farmer in the Middle Ages needed practical, warm clothing. A noble in the Tudor court wanted to display wealth and power through luxurious fabrics. These choices were not just about comfort or style, they were about sending a clear message. Understanding this visual language helps us connect with the people of the past and appreciate the world they lived in. It is a living history, woven into the very fabric of the nation. The evolution of fashion in England is a fascinating story of innovation, influence, and identity. New materials arrived from distant lands, changing what was possible to create. Social revolutions and wars turned old rules upside down, giving people new freedoms in how they dressed. Technology, from the first sewing machines to the internet, has constantly reshaped the way we make and buy our clothes. Each era brought its own unique look, leaving a lasting mark on what came after it. This journey shows us how deeply connected fashion is to the bigger picture of history. This exploration will take us through the key moments of this sartorial story. We will start with the practical garments of ancient Britain and see how things changed in the Middle Ages. Then we will look at the extravagant and powerful styles of the Tudor and Victorian eras. Finally, we will arrive in the fast-paced 20th century, a time of incredible change, and see how it all leads to the fashion we know today. By following this thread, we can understand not just how English fashion evolved, but also how it continues to shape and reflect the identity of the people who wear it. In ancient Britain, long before England was a single country, clothing was all about function. People needed to stay warm and protected from the elements. The main material they used was wool, which they got from their sheep. Men, women, and children often wore simple, long shirts called tunics. These were usually made from a single piece of woolen cloth, belted at the waist. To add a bit of colour, they used natural dyes made from plants and minerals, creating shades of yellow, red, and blue. Over their tunics, they would wear cloaks fastened with a pin or brooch, providing extra warmth during the cold, damp winters. When the Romans arrived, they brought new ideas and materials with them. They introduced the toga for important men, though most people continued to wear the practical tunic. A more significant change was the introduction of linen, a lighter fabric made from flax plants. This offered a more comfortable option for undergarments. After the Romans left and the Anglo-Saxons settled, clothing styles remained relatively simple, but became more decorated. Women wore long linen or wool dresses, often layered and held together with beautiful brooches. Men's tunics became shorter, worn over trousers, which was a very practical choice for farming and fighting. The Middle Ages saw society become more structured, and fashion began to reflect this. The clothes you wore clearly showed your social class. The wealthy could afford vibrant colours like deep red and bright blue, made from expensive imported dyes. They also started wearing finer materials like silk, brought back by traders and crusaders. For the nobility, sleeves became longer and more flowing, and hemlines trailed on the ground to show they did not need to do manual labour. In contrast, peasants and workers wore rough, undyed wool and simple leather shoes, with clothes designed for durability, not for show. By the time the Tudor dynasty came to power, English fashion had become a powerful statement of wealth and status. King Henry VIII's court was a spectacle of luxury. Clothes were designed to create a wide, imposing silhouette. Men wore padded shoulders and a codpiece, while women wore stiff bodices and wide skirts supported by a frame called a farthingale. Rich fabrics like velvet, silk, and cloth of gold were decorated with embroidery, jewels, and lace. Laws known as sumptuary laws even dictated who was allowed to wear certain colours and materials, ensuring that no one could dress above their station. Fashion was now a serious political tool. The Victorian era, named after Queen Victoria, was a time of great change in England, and fashion changed with it. At the beginning of her reign, women's fashion was all about creating a wide, bell-shaped silhouette. They wore huge skirts, held out by layers of petticoats, and later a large cage-like structure called a crinoline. This look was restrictive and impractical, but it was a symbol of a man's wealth. It showed his wife did not need to work. For men, the style became more sober and formal. They wore dark, tailored suits with trousers, a waistcoat, and a frock coat. This look became the foundation of the modern business suit. As the 19th century progressed, the shape of women's clothing began to change. The wide crinoline was replaced by the bustle, a pad or frame that pushed the back of the skirt out, creating a very distinct silhouette. This style emphasized a small waist, achieved by wearing a very tight corset. These corsets were made with whalebone and were incredibly restrictive, often making it difficult to breathe or move freely. Colours were often dark, and dresses were heavily decorated with frills, lace, and ribbons. It was a very formal and fussy style that reflected the strict social rules of the time. The Industrial Revolution had a massive impact on what people wore. The invention of the sewing machine meant that clothes could be made much faster and more cheaply than ever before. For the first time, ready-to-wear clothing became available to the growing middle class. New chemical dyes also created a whole new range of bright, vibrant colours that were more affordable than the old natural dyes. This meant that more people could participate in fashion, not just the very wealthy. The first department stores opened in big cities like London, creating a new and exciting shopping experience for everyone. Towards the end of the Victorian era, there was a movement towards more practical clothing, especially for women. The rise of sports like tennis and cycling meant that the old restrictive clothing was simply not suitable. Women started wearing simpler skirts and blouses, known as shirtwaists. Some progressive thinkers and artists, part of the aesthetic movement, also rejected the tight corsets and heavy fabrics of mainstream fashion. They promoted looser, more natural-looking dresses. These changes were small, but they planted the seeds for the huge fashion revolution that would take place in the 20th century. The 20th century completely transformed English fashion. The First World War was a major turning point. With men away fighting, women took on new roles in factories and on farms, and their clothing had to adapt. Skirts became shorter and corsets were abandoned in favour of more comfortable undergarments. This newfound freedom continued into the 1920s, the era of the flapper. Women cut their hair short, wore loose, straight dresses with dropped waists, and embraced a more boyish silhouette. It was a radical look that symbolised a new, modern woman who was independent and socially liberated. After the Second World War, fashion bounced back with a new energy. The 1960s in particular were a revolutionary decade for English fashion. London, especially Carnaby Street and the King's Road, became the fashion capital of the world. Young designers like Mary Quant introduced the miniskirt, a bold and playful symbol of youth rebellion. Fashion was no longer dictated by older, wealthy elites in Paris. Instead, it was driven by young people, music, and street culture. The mod look, with its sharp suits for men and graphic print dresses for women, defined the swinging London scene and spread across the globe. The later decades of the 20th century saw a splintering of styles. There was no longer one single dominant look. Instead, a variety of subcultures emerged, each with its own distinct fashion. The 1970s had the flowing fabrics of hippies and the glam rock glitter of David Bowie. The 1980s brought the power dressing of sharp-shouldered suits and the anti-fashion of punk with its ripped clothes, safety pins and leather jackets. This was a time when what you wore was a clear statement of your identity and which tribe you belonged to. Fashion became a way to express individuality and rebellion against the mainstream. Today, English fashion is a true melting pot of styles. Globalization and the internet mean that trends can spread instantly around the world. High street stores offer affordable versions of designer looks, making fashion more accessible than ever before. There is a huge emphasis on personal style, mixing vintage pieces with new ones, and combining high-end labels with fast fashion. Sustainability has also become a major conversation, with more people thinking about where their clothes come from and their environmental impact. From tailored suits in the City of London to eclectic styles in Manchester's Northern Quarter, English fashion today is diverse, dynamic, and continues to tell the story of its people.